Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co-host and dear friend, Jake LaQuire. And before we got on air last Tuesday, obviously news was kind of trickling over, spilling over from Black Monday into Tuesday. And we were hearing of other coaches or other front office general managers being fired. Well, between Tuesday and now, we have been enlightened that Tom Telesco is no longer the general manager for the Las Vegas Raiders. And I think a big reason for that, Tom Brady being a minority owner for the Raiders, I was hearing some talks around some of the hotter head coaching candidates, and he realized that Telesco couldn't be a part of that. Like if you're going to get one of these premier guys, he couldn't be in the picture anymore. So I think that's why the exit happened the way it did. It's very interesting because I think the way it started off either Sunday or Monday, Antonio Pierce was talking about training camp like he was still going to be in the building. And then all of this has kind of cascaded since. So what are your initial thoughts before we get in the meat and potatoes of the episode on that firing?
Well, it's just like it was on Tuesday, right? Right before we sit down to record, we get a Twitter notification that Antonio Pierce, they kicked the bucket on him, and it's like, all right, but they're keeping Telesco? What? Like they made a statement. The Raiders put out a statement that they're keeping him, and now, not 10 minutes before we start today, they're getting rid of Telesco. So yeah, I think Brady's involved a ton. I think he realizes that if you want these premier guys, they're going to need to have either their own GM or their hand in the control room there as far as roster construction goes. We saw Vrabel do that in Tennessee. The rumors about Ben Johnson wanting his own guy are pretty prevalent. And Ben Johnson has agreed to interview with the Raiders now. So I think that's a little interesting. At least Brady understands the landscape of it. You know, Mark Davis might have been a bit removed, but Brady, you know, having played, being more involved, I think he's kind of steering them in the right direction. Diana Rossini tweeted today of The Athletic that Brady's had a big hand in these decisions. So I think it's fair to say he's a big reason why any bigger league coaching candidate would want to take the Raiders job, because again, it's not as appetizing as like a team like the Patriots or the Jaguars or the Bears that have pieces in place. You know, this is the Raiders. They don't really have anybody outside of Max Crosby and Brock Bowers now that are like notable players. So I guess they understand what they need to do. And I think Telesco did a decent job this past year with getting Bowers and Jackson Powers Johnson, who we talked about last week. But yeah, he had to go, and I guess it isn't over yet. Maybe we see more firings. Maybe a guy like Ben Johnson convinces Shad Khan, like, hey, you want me, you got to get rid of Balky. And maybe that happens. Who knows? But certainly an interesting order of events that has happened with the Raiders firings.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because they have, I think, a few cornerstone pieces on that roster. Brock Bowers, Max Crosby, a couple of those core guys that I think you can build an identity around. It's just going to take a massive overhaul and a rebuild process. This isn't a 1-year fix like we've seen the Chargers or even the Broncos after Nathaniel Hackett was fired and Sean Payton came in and kind of brought them to 500 and now the playoffs. But I think it's a good time to really get into kind of what the title alluded to, and that was all pros and playoffs. Wildcard Weekend is coming up. But before we get to that, I believe first team and second team all pros drop on Friday, so tomorrow. And we aren't going to do first and second team. We're just going to talk about our first team players that we picked to make all of the kind of roster positions: quarterback, running back, wide receivers, tight end, offensive line, and then obviously the same with the defensive side. And we're really just going to highlight the ones that we disagree on. So this first one is kind of similar to our MVP conversation, and shocking. You have Lamar Jackson as All-Pro first team, and I have Josh Allen as All-Pro first team, or first team All-Pro. I think it's first team All-Pro is how it's said. I am being a little clunky with the words there, but I think the main takeaway is why is he still not only your first team All-Pro, but your MVP this year?
I think he's had just a slightly bit more of an impressive season. I think even if you take game 18 out of it, which he played 3 quarters and Josh Allen played 1 snap to get his his streak going. I think even before that, the numbers are just a little bit in favor of Lamar. But the Bills have been more successful as a team, so you really can't fault it either way. And you were talking about how this is just our first teams. Well, if you look at like our disagreements, that's probably going to make up most of the first and second teams if we hit on all our picks here. So I think most of the players we have on here are pretty deserving of a spot on the first team or second team if they don't make it in. I'm pretty sure it's going to be Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson 1 and 2. Would be fairly surprised if it isn't.
Yeah, it's definitely going to be those two. It's just going to depend on the order. And then obviously, I think whoever's first team All Pro will obviously, I think, win most valuable player because usually a lot of the voters base it on kind of regular season, not the postseason. And we'll talk about that more as that awards show kind of heats up and conversations around that kind of comes to a culmination. But at running back, we have the same guy, Saquon Barkley, goes over the 2,000 mark. Well deserving of that. And then the two wide receivers that we have that are the same are Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, two stud LSU wide receivers. And before we get into the wide receiver we disagree on, I would just want to make a quick case for Josh Allen. I know you brought up a couple points about Lamar. For me, Josh Allen, the thing that separates him, I think he has less around him. So he's elevated the supporting cast he's had around him compared to Lamar. And like you said, they have a better record. And that's, I think, really what tipped the cap for Lamar last year was pulling away with the 1 seed down the stretch. Obviously, the Bills only have the 2 seed, but since these are the two guys going back and forth, that's why I would give the nod to Josh Allen. But the wide receiver we disagree on, you have Amon-Ra St. Brown, and I have A.J. Brown. So two Browns. One was a late, either day 3 or, no, not late.
It was an early day 3.
Early day 3,
Amon-Ra
fourth
St.
round.
Brown.
Yeah.
And AJ Brown was like middle day 2. So
I think it was
not first rounders. Yeah, I think he's toward the end there. But yeah, 2 A Browns, actually, AJ and Amon-Ra there. 2 really good receivers. I think Amon-Ra played more of a complete season. Obviously, AJ Brown missed a little bit, and he has 12 touchdowns, and I think is the focal point for the number 1 offense in the NFC. That's just why he's on there for me. But AJ Brown would probably be my 4th guy if we were extending it to the second team.
Yeah. The reason why I have AJ Brown over Amon-Ra, obviously you can give the nod that he played the full year, racked up more aggregate stats. But I think when you look at their contribution, if I'm to pull AJ Brown off of the Eagles offense, I think there is a major drop in production for that unit. Where I think Ben Johnson with Jamison Williams, Jamar Gibbs, Sam Laporta, some of the other pieces there, why he is a huge contributing factor and does deserve all pro nods, I think AJ Brown's value in terms of like what happens when he's off the field is a bigger disparity. And that's why I want to tip the cap to a guy that I think has a larger impact at the moment when he's on the field.
For sure. Him and Barkley both deserve it. We had the same tight end, Brock Bowers, the rookie phenom there. You could probably throw Kittle in the discussion as well, but I think with what Bowers did with what was around him, to me, is more impressive. He broke the rookie receptions record, broke Mike Ditka's receiving record for a tight end, which, by the way, Bowers did this on like 90 catches. Mike Ditka's record was like on 50 catches. He was averaging like 20 yards a reception as a rookie, which is insane. But Bowers breaks that, and that rounds out our skill position players there. O-line, we had the same left tackle, Tristan Wirfs, phenomenal year for Tampa. Same center, Creed Humphrey. Again, that Chiefs interior line is just disgusting. Joe Thuney even kicked out to left tackle for some games this year. He did a fairly valuable job there. But the other 3 positions, our 2 guards and our right tackle, are different. For me, I had Quinn Miners as one of my guards for Denver. Their offensive line is incredibly stalwart, a big reason why their offense has success. And that entire O-line is under contract for, I think, the next 3 years. So good continuity there. I had Robert Hunt, the Carolina Panther, making my first team All-Pro. I might be being a bit of a homer here. I don't think in reality he's going to be named to the first team or even the second team just because the Panthers only won 5 games. But I think he was the most important player on an O-line that was dead last year, one of the worst O-lines in NFL history, taking them to a top 10 pass pro unit, at least by PFF standards. We'll have to see, like, with all the metrics, aggregating how high the Panthers O-line was. but it's a huge reason why Bryce Young was able to have his turnaround. Then I had Penei Sewell with the Lions. I think he's the best right tackle in the league, and they're even using him as an offensive player in some respect, like a skill player. So you certainly can't go wrong there.
Yeah, it was funny seeing some of the memes circulate this year with the Penei Sewell kind of routes and catches that it went back to the whole Jamar Chase or Penei Sewell. Like, do you need protection or whatnot? I was like, no,
he's
like
both
he's
now.
gonna catch and block. Yeah. Like he can do it all. And he rightfully deserves either first or second team. For me, it's like disparity between, do you like chocolate ice cream or vanilla ice cream when you're looking at Penei Sewell and Lane Johnson with the Eagles at the right tackle position. Both are just true stalwarts. I think Lane Johnson's obviously on the trajectory for a Hall of Fame caliber career, and Penei Sewell is right behind him. And these two guys, if you want to know how to play the right tackle position, turn on the tape with these two because they're some of the best at it. So I don't think you can go wrong with there. A little bit of guard discrepancy. I went with Quentin Nelson with the Indianapolis Colts. Obviously had a phenomenal running game with Anthony Richardson and Jonathan Taylor this year. And he was a big reason why. He's been, I would say him and Zach Martin over the past decade have been some of the best guards in the league. And then the other guy I would tip my cap to is another team that leaned on the run game, has a strong interior presence, and Kevin Dotson with the Los Angeles Rams. He was initially drafted with the Steelers, but he's been a big reason why the Rams have made the playoffs the past 2 years. And I think he deserves his roses here. So again, offensive line, there's a lot of discrepancies. Do you look at pressures? Do you look at impact in the run game? And it just becomes a toss-up of what you value more. I think pass protection is definitely key because passing provides higher efficiency. But when you look at the running game, offensive line is so much of a factor in terms of running backs getting yards that is also a huge thing to look at as well.
For sure. I think all the people we named deserved it. Kevin Dotson in particular, one of the questions we had with the Rams coming into the year was the health of their O-line, and even when they were healthy, how strong can they be? Obviously, he's a huge part of why Kyren Williams is so successful. And when that running game is going, Matthew Stafford has the time to throw to Puka, to Cooper Kupp, and be almost unstoppable. So it's really like the correlation between the all-pro people here and like the teams that made the playoffs, like what teams they're on, is fairly strong. And you'll probably see that throughout the defense as well. And when the like the real rankings come, or the real list comes out tomorrow, I'm sure there'll be a lot of playoff teams or fringe playoff teams in the Jamar Chase and Trey Hendrickson case, as we're about to make.
Yeah, and so I think this is a good way to segue on the defensive side of the ball. We are not going over special teams. It does matter, but not to the extent that we really want to allot time speaking about.
JJ Jansen, all-pro first team long snapper is what I'll say.
Oh, yeah, every year, like without a shadow of a doubt, he's the best. But regardless, we both have the same edges where we have disputes along the defensive line come on the interior side. So both of us have Myles Garrett, Trey Hendrickson. They both lead. They're 1-2 in terms of sacks this year in the NFL. And Myles Garrett, reigning defensive player of the year. Obviously, the Browns have a down year. The Bengals have a down and disappointing year as well. But those were the two bright spots I want to say on their respective defenses. And just because the performances around them weren't as stellar, it doesn't take away from how good these two are.
For sure. If Trey Hendrickson weren't on the Bengals, they probably have close to our record of the most points allowed in a year. I mean, that defense was quite bad, and he was the lone bright spot, like you're saying, that could give them one or two impact plays per game to like allow them to stay in the game or let the offense get one score up on the other team because they didn't stop them otherwise. I think it was 17 and a half sacks total. So actually just slightly over one sack per game, which is pretty incredible to when you think about it. But yeah, the interior of the defensive line, I had Chris Jones with the Chiefs and Zach Allen on the Denver Broncos. I'm pretty sure Allen leads interior defensive players in pressures. He's had a phenomenal year. I remember when we played him, he was just creating havoc. And I think Chris Jones is a big reason why the Chiefs defense is staying afloat, staying strong, and giving them a reason to still be a Super Bowl favorite, a competitive team, and lead them to a 15-2 regular season record because they lost the last week when nobody played. Isn't that funny? Both of my guys played in that that game that got the Broncos in and made the Chiefs lose the game there. But two of the best in the league for sure.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt. Zach Allen and Chris Jones, they're phenomenal players. I mean, what Allen and Zyler, who plays for the Dolphins, have done this year on the interior, it's been nothing short of phenomenal. Chris Jones, he's been amazing as always. I don't think it's been nearly as great as some of his prior years, but still worth all-pro consideration. Guys that I lean towards are Cam Hayward. Steelers defense has been phenomenal this year. It's big reason why they are in the postseason. Obviously, they've had a skid over the past, I think it's like 4 weeks, and then they've had a 5. The past 5 times they've been in the playoffs, it's been one and done. So their season has not kind of gone the way they want to, and it's not heading in the way they want to. But he is still such a high contributor, even as old as he is. I think he's well into his 30s, but he's a true professional through and through. And then Leonard Williams, I think he has been a huge reason for the Seahawks defensive turnaround. This has arguably been his best year as a professional. His pick 6 against the Jets, that was cool. I mean, to see a big man like that running down the sidelines and to cap it off with a score is really special. And I think a lot of the guys on this list have had a lot of special moments. And so I think it's fair to include them. I completely understand if some of the guys you talked about, they get first team, or even the 2 guys I mentioned get first team. It's kind of that murky. It's one of the positions I think this year where there's a lot of good play, but there's not necessarily a lot of great play. And I think if Dexter Lawrence had played all 17 games, he'd be a lock in, and he'd be probably locked in for both of us. And then it just kind of gives one position for a little bit of wiggle room. But moving on, we both have the same linebackers. Zach Bond with the Eagles, been huge with the turnaround that Vic Fangio and some of the rookies that they added in the offseason have helped with that kind of resurgence from what we saw a couple years ago when they made a Super Bowl run. And then Roquan Smith with the Ravens. The defense has had a down year, but he's still one of the best, if not the best linebacker. I think Fred Warner would be in contention for this if he did not have, was it an ankle? Like he broke his ankle bone. I forget what leg bone he broke, but it was like it must have been a hairline fracture because he played through it. But it did obviously impact his performance. And I think if we saw him healthy for most of the year, he would have actually helped the 49ers win a few more games. I think he was held back by limitations outside of his own control. And then I think the discrepancies start getting into cornerbacks because I'll skip ahead the safeties. We have the same 2 safeties, Kyle Hamilton with the Ravens. Their resurgence to the end of the year. They did not look like a good defense early on. I think they've cleaned some of that up. Justin Tucker's making a few field goals. So I think the Ravens feel a lot better about how their team is coming together than what it was. And Kyle Hamilton's a big part of that. And then Xavier McKinney, I think he's one of the league leaders in interceptions. He just got his 8th or 9th against Caleb Williams this past Sunday, I think. And he's just a stud. This is a guy that came from New York, and I'm shocked the Giants just didn't retain their stars. That kind of blew my mind. You let Saquon Barkley, Xavier McKinney leave, and they're arguably both first-team All-Pros outside of your building. So that says a lot about kind of the culture that's being built in New York. And I think definitely questions whether or not Brian Dable and Joe Shine should have been given a 3rd season. But I digress.
Yeah, McKinney, Saquon Barkley, even it's probably 3 or 4 years now with Leonard Williams. He was a Giant originally as well. Dave Gettleman signed him to that big deal, and that's why they had to trade him there. But a lot of good players there. Can't argue with Zach Bond or Roquan Smith. I think when Warner's healthy, I still think Roquan Smith's the best linebacker in the league. They did turn that defense around, and it's because they moved Kyle Hamilton back to safety, where he's the best safety in the league. Should be another, I think he was first-team All-Pro last year. Another first-team All-Pro this year. Should be a shoe-in for him. Corners as well. Another Ravens player we both have is Marlon Humphrey. He's been outstanding this year. In years past, the past 2 or 3 years, it's kind of is the cliff approaching him? Because this is one of his later years. I think this is year 7 or 8 for him. It's is the cliff approaching him? Is it time for him? Not really. I think he has 6 interceptions on the year. 2 or 3 of them are pick sixes, and he's just been locked down. Patrick Surtain, I think we both agree, is the best corner in the league. there should be no explanation as to why he's on here. Just excellent cover guy, supports in the run game. He's the kind of guy that can take away a third of a field, like how you talk about Richard Sherman. That's who Pat Surtain is. To me, I would put him as Defensive Player of the Year. I know some books have TJ Watt as the current leader. I would take Patrick Surtain. And it's interesting to me, you have Surtain, Humphrey, and McKinney, all Alabama DBs during the Saban era. You know, he started out as a defensive backs coach. They know how to make the DBs there, and we all there's agreement like with both of us that all three of them deserve to be first team. It's then that third corner where it's either nickel defender, slot corner, or just another DB where we have a discrepancy. I'm going to go a homer again, and I'm going to say J.C. Horn deserves to be there. He played all the way across the field, guarded everybody, not just number one receivers. When he did guard number one receivers, they didn't do anything. When he guarded twos and threes, they just didn't exist. They were gone from the field. He had, for the longest time, and I don't know if it ended up that way because he missed the last 2 games, but he led the league in run stops for a corner, just played his role throughout. And playing your role in the Panthers defense this past year cannot have been a harder task for an elite defender. And I think he showed why he deserves that. Got his first Pro Bowl nod this year. Again, I don't think he's going to actually receive the first team All-Pro standing or award tomorrow because he's on the Panthers, but I think he certainly has a case to be one of those 3 corners.
Yeah, no, I don't think he's going to get it. He didn't finish the year, and obviously the defense he was on was arguably the worst in NFL history, allowing the most points ever. So that's not really something good to hang your hat on. He had a phenomenal year. I think outside of Mike Evans just mossing him that one game in Carolina, he was clams. He locked down everybody that he covered. Obviously, a couple of bad like snaps. You win some, you lose some against some of the better premier wide receivers. But overall, phenomenal year. Deservedly deserves at least
deserves to be in the discussion,
in the conversation. Yeah. So like whether or not he gets it, that's not the point. It's that he's elevated his game to where he's one of these guys. And I think what's interesting is he gets kind of overshadowed by Patrick Surtain, who went after him. I think the same thing goes for the guy that I have on here that kind of differs. We obviously both have Patrick Surtain and Marlon Humphrey, where you have J.C. Horn. I have Derek Stingley. And this was a guy that went before the guy that's considered like the man, Sauce Gardner. He's already gotten a couple, I think, all pros to his name, which is kind of crazy. And that's, I think, what's interesting is Derek Stingley. He's finally healthy. He's finally found his rhythm in DeMeco Ryans' defensive scheme. And I think he's kind of blossomed into a star this year and deserves recognition for it. I think he got placed on a lot of number ones and he made a lot of big plays all year. I know he was huge in their victory. Was it against the Dolphins? I think Tua was throwing a bunch of like out routes or sideline routes, and he was jumping them. And Tyreek Hill was not fighting for the ball. And I think that's like something we've talked about with different receivers not fighting for it and going back to the ball. Some of that is in that case, but also you got to give props to the defensive player of watching film and knowing when the ball is going to come out and timing that perfectly. And he's a great example of that.
For sure. I think we can both agree the reason that the Texans, and it's obviously because they're in a weak division as well, but they've been able to maintain their hold on that division has been their defense this year. I think their offense has taken a quite noticeable step back from last year. We talk about it quite often, but their defense I still think is top 10, top 12, and Stingley and Will Anderson Jr., their defensive rookie from last year, I think are the 2 main pieces on that defense that allow them to be so disruptive, so multiple in DeMeco Ryans' scheme, and really give star wide receivers like Tyreek Hill fits. We saw Tyreek Hill had a fit like that lasted into the offseason that got resolved yesterday. They sat him down and talked to him. It's like, I don't really want to trade anymore. We're all good. But I digress. Derek Stingley certainly deserves to be there as well.
Well, what's funny when you bring that up, I was listening to The Athletic this week, and they brought up an interesting point about Tyreek Hill. This is the first time in his entire career he has not made the playoffs. When he was drafted to the Chiefs, Alex Smith, Travis Kelce, Andy Reid, they were already in the playoffs. And then you get Mahomes, and then you win a couple of Super Bowls. And then when you are traded to the Dolphins, he's had career years these past 2 years prior to this one, and they made the playoffs. So it's just very interesting to see kind of a diva wide receiver who hasn't hit a road bump like this in his career. And his immediate reaction is, like you said, I want out of here. And then things get smoothed over. But it's just like one of these things, like if Miami season next year goes sideways quickly, he could be a trade deadline candidate, similar to Devontae Adams was this year. But that'll be something we monitor. I think this is a good point to segue into some of the playoff matchups. We have a couple games on Saturday, a couple games on Sunday, and then a Monday game. And I always hate it for the two teams that play on Monday, because then you have relatively speaking, a shorter week, even though you're playing on Sunday. A lot of times you're playing sometimes a team that's already on a bye that has 2 weeks rest advantage. And you kind of already got a day cut into your rest advantage as you prepare for the second round.
Well, and another wrinkle of this is that this one is in LA, and with all the wildfires going on in the Los Angeles area, they talked about maybe having to move this to Arizona Stadium in Glendale. So that one's still up in the air. Obviously, our thoughts and prayers for the Los Angeles area. I have family there. Like they've evacuated. They're okay and everything. But it seems like every year we get a huge fire in California. Obviously tough to see and talk about there. But back onto the NFL topic here. Another LA team does play, and they're on Saturday, but it's the Chargers. They're playing in Houston. Before these two games, we have a college football playoff game tonight, Notre Dame and Penn State, and one tomorrow. So really it's playoffs Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, all in a row for all the hardcore football fans. But for the NFL games, the first one we get is the Chargers and Houston Texans. Houston has never not had a 4:30 Saturday wildcard game. They're always at 4:30. It's like the league knows we don't want to watch these guys. Even last year, it was them versus the Browns, right? The Joe Flacco Browns. They're like, all right, just put them 4:30 Saturday. If people have to go get their car looked at or something, that can be during that game. But this one, I don't think it's going to be super interesting, and here's why. I did a little research before today's episode. I wanted to look at the last third of the season, because I think that's when teams really find out who they are. They get into gear for the playoff push. And over that time span, the Houston Texans are 27th in offensive EPA per play. Quite bad. This is the worst mark of any team in the playoffs. And they're going against a defense that's 12th in EPA per play allowed. And on the flip side, the Chargers offense is 10th. And the Texans defense is 11th. So I think the Chargers have quite a huge advantage there. If the Texans can't get their offense going, and it struggles like it has against the good teams they played over the back half of the year, I think this should be an easy win for the Chargers.
I believe so too. I think there's a few interesting narratives to follow going into this game. One being the Chargers, last time they were in the wild card, blew a massive lead. So if they jump out to a lead,
to an AFC South team as well.
It was to an AFC South team. So just something to monitor if they jump out to an early lead. I don't know if Stroud and this Texans offense has the horses to come back if they fall behind that much, so to speak. Stroud has obviously struggled towards the end of the year. I don't think it helps when you look at like unblocked pressures and just things that could be mitigated by the offensive line coach impacting Stroud and his dropbacks. And I feel like he's begun to feel a little bit more rushed. I think it was very much exemplified in the Ravens game going back to Christmas. And you could just see it. He wasn't setting his feet. He had guys wide open. Bobby Sloak was calling the right plays. Stroud was just in his head, and you could tell the timing was off. And if he doesn't fix that, this is a very opportunistic defense, and I think they're going to jump at every opportunity. The other thing on the flip side to consider is the Texans do boast a good defense as well. So like you said about the 4:30 game, this could be a slugfest, or the Chargers could just win it outright early. And we've seen that a lot with Texans teams that have made the playoffs. They are a one-and-done team. They do not have what it takes to play with the big boys. And I think that's going to be apparent Saturday afternoon. I really do think Jim Harbaugh has these guys prepared. They play sound fundamental football, and they walk out of there with a win. And it'll be very interesting to see kind of the matchup they have going into the divisional round.
So if the Chargers win, they would play, I think the 2 seed if the other team wins. I don't know because it shifts based on who wins, right? It's not like a traditional bracket, so it'll be interesting. We both picked the Chargers here. I think we're pretty confident about that one. The other Saturday game is a classic NFL rivalry. I always love this rivalry. I think they should play Week 18 every year. I don't know why they didn't this year, but Pittsburgh and Baltimore. That's the night game on Saturday. And Baltimore is not going to have Zay Flowers for this one. So Lamar's going to have to be relying on his tight ends, Mark Andrews and Isaiah Likely. Rashad Bateman's going to have to come up big. And I think over the back half of the season, he's played quite well for them. And it's going to have to be the Lamar show against a still pretty good Pittsburgh defense on the year. But recently, again, going back to week 12, 22nd in defensive EPA. So if there's holes to exploit, they've been found over the last 6 or so weeks. I think the Ravens can take advantage of that, despite not having Zay Flowers this week.
It's also in Baltimore. I think
Yeah.
when the Steelers won this matchup the first time, it was in Pittsburgh. And that having the home crowd at your back in a very tough divisional game is going to be huge. And I think that's kind of the difference maker here. I do think the Steelers have the horses on defense to stop the Ravens and make this a very low scoring game. However, I think the X factor is going to come on the offensive side for the Steelers. And George Pickens needs to get his head out of his ass. Like, point blank, like, I don't know what's been going on the past month, but a large reason why they were winning with Justin Fields, with Russell Wilson early on before this losing streak is because he was making phenomenal plays. He was dialed in. Like, you could beat the crap out of the corners, but run your route. Like, don't
catch
let
the
this
ball too.
Yeah,
they had quite a few drops in their last game against the Bengals there. And talking about like just over the stretch or how they've skidded, the Texans were 3-3 in that little time period there. That was the second worst record. The Steelers are 2-5. Like, they're really reeling on the back end here. And for me, like, your X factor is Pickens. Mine is going to be the guys protect or guarding against Pickens, the guys we talked about: Kyle Hamilton, Roquan Smith, Marlon Humphrey. I think the Ravens defense has a potential to blank the Steelers offense in this game. And it might be a low scoring affair. We might get like a 17-point score for the Ravens, but I could see like 0-3 for the Steelers in this one. I think they have the opportunity to really shut them down.
And maybe that's the case. We saw the Bills and the Chiefs over the past couple of years when the Steelers have made it to this wild card round, completely outclass them. And I think that's definitely a possibility in this game. I think it being a divisional game, there's a chance that it could be close early and that the Ravens pull away late, but we'll see. Both of us have the Ravens winning that matchup, and that now sends it into Sunday with the game that I will monitor for upset of the week. I'm not picking the upset, but I think it's very interesting when you see how the Broncos and the Bills match up. The Broncos have a phenomenal defense, and on offense, they can play sound fundamental football behind their offensive line. And if they get the run game going, I think this game really gets determined by the Bills' interior defensive line. Josh Allen could obviously be special at any given game, but to me, this has the feeling of like the Bills aren't ready on defense. And if Josh Allen, for whatever reason, makes a mistake or two, it's going to be to the point where the Broncos are in a position to win this. Does that happen? No. But I see the breadcrumbs for it, especially when you look back and see that Sean Payton won this matchup last year in Denver. Obviously, a lot of fluky stuff happened. Joe Brady became the offensive coordinator after that game as Ken Dorsey was dismissed from his post. But it's just one of those things that this could be that upset.
I think I'm going to lean more in the Bills' direction. I know you're picking the Bills, but I'm confident that Josh Allen, the way he's playing right now, can just pretty much get whatever he wants on offense. But I will say, to your point, I think this could be like a clock management game. I think Denver has the horses to bleed the clock out, shorten the number of opportunities the Bills get to score against a Bills offense here. But ultimately, I do think the Bills win. Josh Allen's going to be the X factor. But some of those guys that we talked about in the trenches for Denver, I think are people to keep your eye on, because obviously Josh Allen's really turned down his turnover, not potential, but his tendencies to do so. And he always tightens it up in the playoffs. They have guys like Nick Benito, Surtain, and Zach Allen who are opportunistic and can make the most of opportunities like that. That being said, I still have the Bills in this one. I don't think it's going to be as much of a potential for an upset maybe as you do.
Yeah, I think when I look at how it'll play out, for me, Amari Cooper is going to get blanketed if he's healthy for this game by Patrick Surtain. And to me, I do think Keon Coleman, I definitely think Dalton Kincaid, if these guys are healthy, James Cook can be the impact guys in the pass game. And we've seen offenses that have multiple weapons to kind of throw to. Bengals in more recent weeks where T. Higgins became that guy, got 3 touchdowns, helped them win that game. And I definitely think that the Bills can do what the Ravens did to the Broncos earlier in the year. And that's just mop the floor with them. Win 40-10, get out of there, advance. The Broncos have a lot to kind of mull over in the offseason and stuff to grow from. And if Bo Nix is Mac Jones 2.0, the last time Mac Jones was in the postseason, he played the Bills in the first game and they got absolutely mollywopped. So I definitely think that's a possibility. Sean McDermott can definitely be on his A game. You have Gregory Rousseau, Von Miller, Ed Oliver, seasoned vets on that defensive line that I think are ready to play playoff football. So we'll see if that's the case. Like you said, both of us have the Bills. It's just, for me, with everything that is going on with the media, you always have one of these games that kind of pops up and surprises you. And for me, this has kind of the sensation of that it smells like it sounds like
you
like,
feel it in your bones that this could be
one of those. Yeah.
So, and before we speak bad on Mac Jones in that playoff game, that first drive he had was phenomenal up until the interception, which that was a perfect throw, but I don't remember if it was Poyer or Hyde made the best interception I've ever seen in my life. Like it's like LeBron's chase down block. Like he covered probably 100 yards going to get it and just snagged it there. And then obviously Mac Jones didn't do anything for the rest of the game after that. It was like 49-7 or whatever the score was. They blanketed them. I don't think it's going to be like that, but I do think the Bills win. The next game, the 4:30, the middle window game, is a matchup of week 1. We talked about it on Tuesday. We have a couple week 1 rematches. This one isn't going to be in Brazil this time. It's going to be in Philadelphia. Green Bay versus Philly. For me, the X factor is going to be the guys that we talked about, Saquon and A.J. Brown, but not necessarily how they perform, how they can insulate whoever is going to be quarterback. I still don't know if Jalen Hurts is going to play or not. I know he's still dealing with the concussion. Kenny Pickett got injured in their last game as well. Tanner McKee had to come in. I didn't think he played poorly, but certainly a young quarterback like that matching up against what Matt LaFleur did last year to the Dallas Cowboys. I don't think it's a great matchup for him, but I think Saquon and A.J. Brown can overcome any unless it's like just really generationally bad QB play. I think they can overcome it.
Yeah, Tanner McKee played fairly well, but it was the Giants. So I don't know how much merit you put on that. I think the Packers are definitely a better defense. Jalen Hurts will definitely, I think, be the deciding factor. I think if he's not the starter, I think both of us might lean Packers in this, but you are playing in the link. The Eagles do have a really good defense. And where you talked about the Steelers and Texans kind of being on this downward slope of the past kind of back third of the season, that's the feeling I get with the Packers. They've won a lot of games they should, but when you have a couple divisional round matchups where you can get a leg up and potentially vie for the 1 or 2 seed, it just seemed like they rolled over. They weren't ready for it. And maybe it's just the fact that this is a young team and they need kind of like a veteran presence. And maybe that's something they can address in free agency and bring in some of those seasoned players that have been in some of these high leverage games deep in January and February. But as of right now, I don't have a lot of faith in this Packers team, even though they were my preseason Super Bowl pick. And unless Matt LaFleur comes out swinging like he did against the Cowboys last year, which maybe there is some stuff he can throw at Vic Fangio. He plays a lot of cover 4 and these 2 4-high shells where guys are backing up. Maybe you can take advantage of that. Now, obviously, guys like Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs hurt. So it makes it very unlikely that that's going to happen. And I think just with the Eagles defensive line, that's going to mitigate some of the Packers rushing success. And I think like both of us have here picked, the Eagles will win. So it's just, there are things where you can go like, maybe I could see the Packers winning, but it's hard.
Yeah, like I think I can always trust Matt LaFleur to have a game plan, right? But I think you brought up a really good point. The teams that they played against, the good teams at least, they tend to struggle. They're although they're better than the Bears, right? We can agree that even though they just lost to them, both them and the Bears have a 1-5 division record. They have their wins are against each other, obviously. 0-2 against the Lions, who are a really good team. 0-2 against the Vikings, who are a really good team, despite what we saw this past Sunday. Then they also lost to Philly in the opener down in Brazil. So against the better, like the upper echelon teams in the NFC, the Packers haven't gotten it done this season, and I think we could see that happen again if the Eagles are, even if it's Kenny Pickett or McKee, able to play fundamental on offense and have that defense shut down whatever the Packers offense is going to do. So I think we both still have the Eagles. I'm kind of talking myself into, even if it's not Jalen Hurts picking the Eagles, but that'll be, we'll call it a game time decision on that one. So far, all four of the games we've mentioned, we have the same picks: Chargers, Ravens, Bills, Eagles. We actually differentiate here on the last two games. The first one is going to be the rematch of Washington and Tampa. Your perfect take was that I believe Washington wins, right? Yeah, they avenge week one and win this matchup. I see it a bit differently. I think the Tampa Bay Buccaneers have been on a roll, and while they played teams like the Panthers and lesser teams, I think they're really firing on all cylinders. And while I don't think they're going to hang 50 or was it 48 on Washington like they did against us, I think they have the capacity to score a lot and score quickly. And I don't know if Washington's going to be able to keep up.
So the first time around, Chris Godwin was on the field. And I'm not
Mm-hmm.
saying the Buccaneers offense has necessarily changed. We've seen Bucky Irving come to life over the course of this season. And I don't think that was necessarily as much of a factor in week one. What I will say is that game was a lot closer than the final score indicated. The Buccaneers won that game 37-20 to open up the season. But at one point in the third quarter, it was 23-14. You could definitely see that the Commanders were still in the game. It was just they kind of faltered as of late. I think right now the Commanders, they've hit their stride. They won a big momentum changing game, in my opinion, against the Eagles a couple weeks back. And obviously, Jaden Daniels didn't look super sharp in the first half against the Cowboys. This isn't a first half team. This is a team that tends to turn it on in the second half. And I feel like as long as they can go shot for shot, similar to what we just saw the Saints do with the Bucs, they have a chance to pull this out. Jaden Daniels is special, and what he's done in the fourth quarter all throughout this season, I think, in my opinion, just makes it so that he has the upper leg. These are defenses that like blitzing after the quarterback. These are quarterbacks that are really great against the blitz. And I think Jaden Daniels is more often than not going to find the answer, where I think Dan Quinn might have something up his sleeve to slow Baker Mayfield down and throw some maybe exotic looks to confuse him, force him to hold the ball a little bit, and let that pass rush and that blitz get after him and impact this game.
Yeah, I like what you're saying. I think there's an X factor on both sides and both on the, like, for both defenses. Number one, Kalijah Kancey and Vita Vea have been very good as of late. Kalijah Kancey, I think, is a sneaky guy. If there were a third team All Pro, he might make the third team there as one of the defensive tackles. He's been phenomenal. Proved me wrong. I thought he was a little too undersized to be as effective at the NFL level. He was getting Aaron Donald comps, and he's certainly not Aaron Donald yet, but he's playing at a high level next to Vea. But the other one, and I think this goes in your favor, this is a Mike Evans, Marshawn Lattimore game. And if Lattimore can kind of take away Mike Evans or get in his head, who's going to be the primary pass catcher for Baker? I think that's the real question there. But ultimately, I'm going to lean on the run game of Tampa Bay, and my pick, I think you're going to lean on the run, or not the run game, but the legs of Jaden Daniels as your X factor. That's going to be the first game that we differ on. And then the other game, the game that might be in Arizona if things take a turn for the worse, Minnesota and the LA Rams. I really hope that the Vikings bounce back for our draft pick status. Obviously, we need the Rams to lose to keep their second round pick as low as possible. And I think they will bounce back. I think Kevin O'Connell has shown his capacity to do so this season. And I think when you have Justin Jefferson, when you have Jordan Addison and TJ Hawkinson, you have the horses to compete with anybody, even a defense that has a lot of good young pieces. They haven't been as good as of late over that 6-week time frame. They're 25th in defensive EPA, so they allow what would that be? The 10th best in terms of offense. But I think it'll be a close game. But I like the Vikings to peel away just because of how good Justin Jefferson is.
I don't think this is a question about how good Justin Jefferson is. I think there's a certain quarterback that struggles in the
Matt
spotlight.
Stafford.
Yeah. The guy that couldn't get it done in Detroit. McVay had to carry him to his first Super Bowl title. Cooper Kupp brought in a miraculous no-look catch, et cetera, et cetera. But no, I think the Rams, when you look at just how they're built and that how they're healthy right now, the Vikings aren't a team that are just like littered with talent. In my opinion, this isn't the Eagles. This isn't the Lions. These aren't teams that just have so many dudes and their dudes just one-on-one against yours. It's just not going to cut it. And yes, Justin Jefferson, complete stud. The Rams secondary, trash. Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson, going to be open. But those guys were open last week against Detroit. And Sam Darnold could not get it done. Sam Darnold can't get it done in the clutch. We saw this in Carolina when he choked away our chance to make the playoffs with Steve Wilkes. Couldn't get it done. Back with the Jets, obviously floundered, saw ghosts, and we saw those demons rear their ugly head again in Detroit. And I think on the playoff stage and a moment that Sam Darnold has never been in, it's not going to be enough. I think Matthew Stafford, Sean McVay, they find a way. And the last time the Vikings lost to Detroit earlier in the year, the week after, they lost to the Rams. And it was in Los Angeles in prime time. So that's all I want to put out there. That's why I disagree with it. Matthew Stafford, seasoned veteran. McVay, obviously the former teacher of Kevin O'Connell, I think is going to have a couple things up his sleeve come Monday night that he's just not going to be able to weather.
And I'm glad you made these points because they're all good points. I think if we've seen the Rams, if it's a team that has to go band for band with somebody, they can do it. They can put up the high scores. They did it against the Buffalo Bills there. I think the Vikings defense is a little bit better. But when you talk about Sam Darnold, he doesn't have the horses to get it done. I agree with you there. But you're forgetting that there is a hidden X factor we might not see on the roster, but I think can help Sam Darnold out. There's been a transaction recently this past week with the Vikings. Do you know what it is? They signed someone from their practice squad to the 53 permanently for the rest of the season. It was a certain quarterback with a playoff win to his name by the name of Daniel Jones. And maybe if Daniel Jones could talk some sense into Darnold, maybe, just maybe, they'll be able to pull it off. Daniel Jones is we'll call it a proven playoff quarterback. He's beaten a 13-win team before the playoffs. Maybe he can get in Darnold's ear and tell him what to do and let Darnold get the win against the Rams there.
So this is the second time Kevin O'Connell over the past 3 years has gone 14-3. Great season. A lot of people thought the Vikings would pick top 10. It's just, to me, like if Sam Darnold can't get it done, can't make the throws, it doesn't matter what play calls or drawn up. And when I look at the Vikings defense, they are very opportunistic. If Andrew Van Ginkel gets a pick six like he was supposed to against Detroit on Sunday, like those are game swinging plays. And it's definitely possible the Vikings pull this off. I can't put my faith in Darnold. I've seen Stafford in these moments and he's come up clutch. You can't name a time for me that Darnold's necessarily been clutch. There have been a couple times this year where he's gone and scored a touchdown. We saw it against the Cardinals when Greg Olsen called it. But like there was an element of there wasn't really pressure. At that point in the year, they were sitting pretty comfortably in terms of like a playoff spot. And so that's where I'm just like when the chips are down, it's do or die. I just don't know if Darnold has that dog in him.
Yeah, and I guess my main point is I don't think he can be as bad as last week was. If he is, the Rams got it, but there were just so many open Jefferson touchdowns, not just plays across the field, touchdowns.
I saw the game that you saw, dude, but that's what I'm saying.
I don't think he's going to miss like 8 open Jefferson touchdowns, but who knows? I digress. Hopefully he doesn't because, again, the Rams lose. They'll probably end up picking record-wise like 20th or something. That'll give us the 53rd, 54th pick in the draft as opposed to like the 60th. that would be nice, but we'll have to wait and see on that one. I think we're into perfect takes territory now, unless you have anything else with the playoff games. And on Tuesday, both of our takes were related to the playoffs because I said I can't think of a head coach one right now. I was sick, I was all sniffly, blowing my nose, put me on the spot, and I couldn't do it. But today, I finally have a head coach related one, so we're a bit backwards on the week, but this is the one I'm rocking with. We just saw what I can presume a head coaching candidate or multiple saying, we're not coming to the Raiders unless you get rid of that GM. And they got rid of the GM. The Jacksonville Jaguars, I think, have all the makings of an attractive spot for an offensive-minded head coach, Ben Johnson. But Trent Baalke is still there, and he struck gold with getting Harbaugh. But after that, every coach he's hired. So what I think is going to happen is Ben Johnson is going to wow Shad Khan in his interview, be like, yeah, this is who I am. This is my resume, yada, yada, yada. But I'm not going to come coach here unless you get rid of Baalke. So I'm going to say the places Ben Johnson goes, it's either Jacksonville getting Baalke out of there, or he goes back to Detroit and is like, you know what? Whatever. I'll just wait on the Giants when they get the number 1 pick and take Arch Manning. And I'm sure the Mara family will pay me more than what they will in Jacksonville. So I'm saying he's either going to Jacksonville or he's not going anywhere this offseason.
So why not Chicago? Why not the Bears?
I've more dysfunction
from Bears fans that say Ben Johnson's camp says he's cool working with Brian Poles, which I think is wild. But that's the report.
I'm not saying Poles is as bad as Trent Baalke, but I don't think he has a stellar resume by any means. His wins are beating Scott Fitterer in a trade, and then with those trade assets, he took Darnell Wright, who didn't wow me this year for them, who's a top 10 right tackle pick, Tyreek Stevenson, who lost them a Hail Mary, Caleb Williams, who struggled mightily this season, one of the worst rookie seasons in recent memory, fewer touchdowns than Bryce Young this year, by the way, despite Bryce only playing in 10 games or whatever. And he traded for Montez Sweat, extended him. Sweat hasn't done anything this year. Traded the 33rd overall pick for Chase Claypool one time. Like, this is not a superstar general manager by any means. This is not like the Ozzie Newsomes or the Eric DeCosta. He's not one of those guys, despite Bears fans, or not Bears fans, the NFL media thinking, oh, he's this guy, he robbed the Panthers. Well, he robbed Scott Fitterer, and Bryce Young looks better right now. So did he? Who knows? And if Ben Johnson doesn't want to work there, and the McCaskies, the Bears owners, have already committed to Ryan Poles, kind of like how Jacksonville has to Baalke, I don't know. If I'm Ben Johnson, I would much rather go coach Trevor Lawrence than I would Caleb Williams. I would also rather coach Drake May, but I think that's a popular Mike Vrabel landing spot in New England. So I'm saying Jacksonville, or he's staying, and it's like, you know what? I can just keep biding my time until the perfect spot opens up for me.
I like that one. I do. I think there are a lot of good points about the Bears' dysfunction, but I think the Jaguars have it as well. Mm-hmm. We've talked about the personnel already in Jacksonville kind of mirrors a little bit of what's in Detroit. They need to fix the offensive line, and I'm sure Ben Johnson would make that a point of emphasis if he went to Jacksonville. For me, I'll keep it in the same department, but I'm going to double down on the take I had on Tuesday. I obviously had the Commanders beating the Bucs in Tampa Bay, but I think because of that loss, and because of the mediocrity that has been with Todd Bowles the past 3 years and the potential of Liam Cohen leaving the building, the Buccaneers ownership group does something similar to what they did a couple years back: fire a defensive head coach and hire their offensive coordinator as the head coach. And I think Liam Cohen becomes the head coach for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going into next year. And I think they find a new defensive identity and really build it around, like you said, their two cornerstone pieces on the interior, Kalijah Kancey and Vita Vea, because those two are becoming an extremely dynamic duo and could change the outcome on Sunday night's game.
Yeah, I like that for a lot of reasons. Number one, the NFC South over the past, 4 years has been quite bad, but right now you have the Falcons breathing down their neck if Penix turns out to be a good quarterback. Bryce Young seems to be a good quarterback, and the Panthers, if they can score 40 per game or whatever, if they just make their defense 24th or something, that team wins 8 or 9 games this past year. Like, funnily enough, like all the close games we had post bye, if our defense was average, those are wins. So the Panthers can be breathing down their neck. I don't think the Saints are going to be good anytime soon, but they always move around to make sure they win at least 5 games. So I like that one. I think they don't want to lose Liam Cohen. And to kind of wrap this all up into my pick, when they got rid of Byron Leftwich, who was the OC when they won the Super Bowl with Brady, he interviewed with the Jags and said, he was a Jags QB. He's like a local legend around those parts. He said, "I'm not taking the job unless you get rid of Balky." And he didn't get rid of Balky, and see what happens there. So maybe Shad Cotton learns his lesson. Maybe the Bucs ownership not learn their lesson, but don't want to get rid of Liam Cohen, who certainly, if teams missed out on Ben Johnson, that's going to be a hot name to go for. So I like both of our takes respectively there, and I think both of them might turn out to be correct.
We'll see.
Or
until
perfect,
then, yeah, they should be perfect. We'll review them. I think the Todd Bowles one will be obviously more apparent if they don't win. If they do win and advance to the next round, it's hard for me seeing Todd Bowles fired because that would be back-to-back years getting to the divisional round. And I think ownership groups and teams take a lot more stock in some of that than they probably should. Titans being the best example with Mike Vrabel over the past few years. And so that's just something to be hesitant about. But for those of you who are looking for the fine Purrfect Takes content, you can find us on Twitter. We'll be posting more in the offseason, especially ramping up towards the draft. You can find us on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube, wherever you get your media, where you listen to podcasts. And until next Tuesday, enjoy all the football between, like Jacob said, today, starting with some of the college football playoffs, some good games now going all the way into Monday. We are ramping down the football season, but we got some special matchups, and it's going to be some good football. So keep pounding, and we'll catch you guys Tuesday.